The runoff elections in Georgia between Republican incumbent Senators Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue against Democrats Raphael Warnock and Jon Ossoff will determine which party controls the Senate next year. Loeffler and Perdue are supporting a lawsuit challenging the results of the presidential election in 4 battleground states, including their own. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton filed that lawsuit. It asked the U.S. Supreme Court to block Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania from voting in the Electoral College. They are all states President-elect Joe Biden won. Paxton claims changes made to voting procedures because of the pandemic allowed for voter fraud. Federal and state court judges have found no evidence of any widespread fraud. In a joint statement on Tuesday, the Republican senators said this about their stance, quote, "This isn't hard and it isn't partisan. It's American." One place that helped secure Biden's victory in Georgia was Cobb County, northwest of Atlanta. Mr. Biden won that county 56 to 42%. Hillary Clinton defeated Donald Trump there by 2 points in 2016. Over 500,000 people live there. Cobb County officials had tried to pare down the number of early voting locations for next month's runoffs from 11 to 5. According to the NAACP, many of the ones that had been slated to shut down were located in majority Black and Latino neighborhoods. The group said some voters would have to travel between 5 and 12 miles to get to their nearest polling place. County elections officials defended the move, saying they simply don't have as many people to work the polling places as they did during the general election due to holidays and burnout. They have since walked back some of that decision. There will now be 7 early voting spots. Jason Shepard is chairman of the Cobb County Republican Party, and he joins me now from Marietta, Georgia. Welcome, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
What do you understand is the reason why officials wanted to scale back the number of early polling places, and what do you think about that?
Well, it's the same decision they make with every election. It's basically looking at how many voters have requested absentee ballot. And in Cobb County at this point, over 1/5 of registered voters have already requested an absentee ballot. So right there, 20% of the possible voting pool is already planning to vote by absentee, by mail. So runoff elections, generally speaking, do not have the same level of turnout as even a midterm election or especially a general election in a presidential year. In addition to what the Board of Elections has said, that you have a staffing problem, you're around the holidays, you have 5 locations that are spread out around the county. So no one's going to be very far from an early voting location. We have about that many early voting locations during the primary, where, of course, we see less turnout in the primary than we do in the general election, and even less so in the runoff. So, and the thing to keep in mind is, in addition to being able to request an absentee ballot, on Election Day, there's going to be 144 voting locations throughout the county, most of them no more than a couple miles drive from anyone's home. So if you wait till Election Day, especially with so many people early voting, just like in the November election, there were no waits, there were no lines, and people were generally in and out voting on Election Day, November 3rd, within 5 minutes.
Let's turn to the election earlier. Georgia's Secretary of State says there's no evidence of large-scale voter fraud in your state. You have said, though, you believe there were issues with the election. Specifically, what kind of issues have you seen? What proof have you actually seen of that?
Well, we've seen a number of things happen, especially with voters who are not qualified to vote actually voting. Those include voters who had not reached the age of 18. Those were voters who did not live at the addresses that they claimed they lived at. We've been working with Fulton County on a project, knocking on doors of potential voters who claim to live at certain addresses. And overwhelmingly, we're finding those voters have not lived at that address for years, but they've cast ballots from that address in this past November election. There's also problems that we've seen with felons voting and those who are not U.S. citizens voting. Was that enough votes to overturn the presidential election? Well, we have to find the evidence, and it's very hard to collect that much evidence. Georgia has a very specific law on how to overturn any election, and it's not just finding and throwing out the number of voters that make the difference between the winning candidate and the candidate that comes in second place. It's a formula much larger than that. So even though we are seeing with probably enough votes to count as fraud, the truth of the matter is we don't know how that voter voted. Did they skip over the presidential election? Did they vote for President Trump? Did they vote for Vice President Biden? Or did they vote third party for Joe Jorgensen? Or did they write in Mickey Mouse like my grandfather used to when he didn't like either of the candidates? So that's why Georgia has this formula. At this point, though, to find probably the 80, 90, almost 100,000 votes to actually throw out and call for a new election for the presidential electors, that's a very high hill to climb. And that requires time, that requires research, and I don't know that we had enough time to do that in this case.
Mr. Chairman, I believe we appear to have lost your signal, but you can still hear me. Is that correct?
That is correct. Hold on.
Okay. The wonders of technology.
Exactly.
We'll get you back here in just a moment, but I really want to dig into this just a little bit deeper, because if that's the case, if you do have concerns about this election that just passed, and it sounds as though there is a lack of confidence on your part in what actually took place, then why should voters in Georgia have confidence in the upcoming Senate runoff election?
Well, I've told a lot of Republicans, in fact, I told the Douglas County Republican Women's Club last night, that the way to combat voter fraud is to overwhelmingly show up at the polls. I mean, if this election was stolen, it was only because it was a close election. You cannot steal an election that's not close. There was an election that we had in Congress in 1791 that I actually have an old newspaper clipping about from that actual paper, which was thrown out because there were 9 more votes than eligible voters. Once again, that would have been a close election, so a new election was called for. But if we can't come out in the numbers for Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue, like Georgian Republicans came out for Saxby Chambliss when he was in a runoff in 2008, where he got more than 57% of the vote in that runoff, I think we'll be fine. If the problem is in the absentee ballots, it's trying to manufacture enough fake votes to overcome that majority. And what's more is we're more prepared right now than we were in November. We know what to look for. We're doing our data checks. We're going, like I said, door to door, and we're finding people, and we can challenge those voters on the rolls. And that's part of what we plan to do. So in addition to that, and having poll watchers at every early voting location and at every polling site on Election Day, we're more prepared and we know what to look for this time around.
So, as you know, I'm sure some Republicans have privately expressed concerns that some of the rhetoric surrounding the past election may, in fact, depress Republican voter turnout. Is that something that concerns you?
It is a bit of a concern. And like I said, we're trying to combat it. And we've had a great ally in that with President Trump and Vice President Pence. So the president and vice president have already been here to campaign for David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler. The vice president's coming back and campaigning again, and I'm sure the president will be coming back as well. Both of them are sending the message that we need every Republican to get back out and vote. There are more than 30,000 Republicans in Georgia who voted in the Republican primary but did not vote in the presidential election. We need to get those voters back out to the polls on January 5th. So we're working very hard to knock every door and call every voter and make sure they understand how important this election is, not just for Georgia, but for the entire country.
So as we mentioned, Republican Senators Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue said that they support Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton's lawsuit seeking to throw out Georgia's election results. And meanwhile, the office of Georgia's own Attorney General, Chris Carr, a Republican, called it, quote, constitutionally, legally, and factually wrong. Are you concerned that this deepening divide among the party could end up hurting Georgia Republicans?
No, I'm not concerned. I mean, Chris Carr is a good friend. We've known each other since undergrad and college. And his job is to defend the state of Georgia. He is the state's attorney, and he's going to defend that lawsuit on behalf of the state. Our job at the party and at the local level and grassroots level is to focus on the task ahead of us, and that is reelecting both of these U.S. senators.
All right, I'm afraid we're out of time. Jason Shepard, thank you very much for being with us. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Glad to be with you.